Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Japour, and I'm here with Dr. Joshua Schiffman on the Disruptive BioTalk podcast series. So, Joshua, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's great to meet you again. I remember hearing one of your talks on all of the projects you have going on at PEEL, and I thought to myself it would make a great podcast. So for those who are tuning in, Dr. Joshua Schiffman did his medical school education at Brown Medical School, and then did his residency in internal medicine and pediatrics. He was chief resident and did a pediatric hematology fellowship all at Stanford. So how did you get from Stanford all the way to Utah?
It's an interesting question, Anthony. My journey has been less than straightforward, but that's what keeps it interesting. So really, actually, all started for me when I was 15 years old, and I was diagnosed with a childhood cancer called Hodgkin lymphoma. And shortly after that, I went through my summer of what I call R&R, rest and radiation, came out the other side and said, you know what? When I grow up, I want to take care of kids with cancer just the way the doctors took care of me. So I
Wow.
went to medical school, kind of, the traditional image. I wanted to be the doctor, sit on the bed with the patients, hold their hand, get them better, and so on. And as you said, trained on the East Coast at Brown, and then went west about as far as I could to the other coast to Stanford, and there really learned the art and practice of medicine. How do you take care of patients? And actually was quite interested initially in palliative care, kids who were dying and succumbing to disease. And I really understood how important it was for us to come up with new medicines for these children and their family. And also, interestingly, became very fascinated by genetic predisposition, right? It's hard to be at Stanford University and not get a touch of genomics and genetics and what does it all mean and how do you put it together? And of
Mhm.
course, at Stanford, there's always biotech going on in the background. So as you mentioned, I went through my training, initially focused on clinical care, but then became really, really enamored, Anthony, with the laboratory. And
Wow.
what can we do in the laboratory with genomics and technology to really make a difference, not just one patient at a time, but for all patients? How do we move the field forward?
That's interesting because I actually had a very similar. I mean, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor when I was a child, but
Right.
I also started down a very clinical pathway. Did my residency in a more community-based hospital, but because of the AIDS epidemic, I was drawn into the lab bench, and also then found myself going from the lab to a fellowship, and then ultimately to industry. So that's an interesting background that you have.
Yeah, I think, Anthony, it's really helpful, and you probably agree that it helps keep you grounded and gives you perspective. And even in the company now, PEEL Therapeutics, which we'll talk about, every time we have a meeting, I'm always bringing up patients that I've taken care of or new patients that have contacted us because we're very, very focused on what does it mean at the bedside when we actually get our discoveries and medicines to the patients who need them most.
So would you consider yourself a translational
Yeah.
investigator, that you really like that bridge from the bedside to the lab directly to the bedside?
Yeah, and in fact, one of my mentors at Stanford had really drilled into me, and he would say, "Josh, it's not bench to bedside; it's bedside to bench,
Oh,
and then back to bedside." So, a lot of my earlier work really involved taking samples and questions from patients, bringing
mhm.
them into the lab, doing discovery-based science, generating hypotheses, and then figuring out how do we take those discoveries back to the patients, which is now what we're focusing on quite a bit at PEEL.
Okay, great. So I'm still anxious to hear how you got to Utah.
Yeah. So how does someone get from East Coast, West Coast, and then end up in Salt Lake City, Utah?
Right.
Well, I mentioned that I was very, very interested in translational science and genetics and cancer predisposition. And so I came out here to join Huntsman Cancer Institute originally, where there's such a big focus on genes and cancer, the breast cancer gene, BRCA1, BRCA2. There was a lot of emphasis here. I particularly was very interested in P53 They have the Utah population database, and I really began to focus and become immersed in a translational laboratory about the genetics of cancer and who's getting sick and what children and what families. He even set up a clinic here to help with some of these patients with Li-Fraumeni syndrome, especially the children, right? I mean, this comes back, Anthony, to this conversation of, thinking about ourselves and why do we go into medicine, and wondering, oh, hey, why did I get cancer? And why do my other patients get cancer? And can we try to answer that question? And so came to Utah, and for several years, again, very focused on this question, who's getting cancer and why?
And so you were in a very academic, still a very academic mindset at that point. You hadn't really, had you thought that you were ever going to become CEO of a biotechnology company?
I hadn't really considered it. I've always been very drawn to being disruptive, right? What this podcast is about. I always like being a pioneer and going places where other people haven't, but I hadn't yet at that point considered biotech as the way to do it. I was still quite enmeshed in discovery science in the academic setting.
Interesting. Okay, so how did PEEL come to be?
Well, Anthony, here comes the elephants, right? So I told you we were really very focused on this idea of who's getting more cancer and why, and looking at animal models and my patients and their families and tracking generations of cancer. And I found myself at actually a conference all the way back on the East Coast in Bar Harbor, Maine. Great place, great lobster. But we were there at a conference and we were talking about the evolution of cancer. And I heard a speaker discussing the fact that elephants, big giant elephants, almost never get cancer. And at first I thought, oh, I must be in the wrong place. I came here to learn about cancer. Why are we talking about elephants? But Dr. Maley, the speaker, who's now at ASU, explained that elephants are so large, Anthony. They are 100 times the size of people.
Mhm.
They live 60, 70 years. That many cells in their body dividing decade after decade, they should all be dying of cancer at a young age unless they were somehow protected. And so this physician, Dr. Maley, made this discovery that when he looked at the genomes, again, discovery science, when he looked at the
Mhm.
genome of elephants, he and his postdoc student learned that the elephants, instead of two copies of the P53 gene, which
Mhm.
protects us from cancer, a very important tumor suppressor gene, instead of two copies, elephants have 20 times as many, 40 copies. And he went on to say that he didn't know if that was the reason that elephants didn't get cancer, but it was sure very intriguing. So
Mm.
I started talking to him during the break and we struck up a collaboration. And I said, the patients that I'm taking care of, uh, they're all missing their P53 gene and they're getting a lot of cancer.
Mm.
You said that elephants with extra P53 almost never get cancer, but you weren't sure if that's the reason why. What if we could study this in the lab and really try to understand? And so he was excited. I was excited. Many academic adventures later, I found myself at Utah's Hogle Zoo talking to the zookeeper. We even teamed up with Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus and studied their elephants. And we learned about the biology. And sure enough, these elephant P53 genes work even better than human P53 genes at preventing cancer in elephants. And we
Interesting.
we
And this is
published.
never,
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
this had never been known before. The numeric number of these P53s.
No, this was part of the discovery. And here again, talk about disruptive. Um, it took us a long time to find a journal that was willing to publish a discovery like this. And we ended up actually having a conversation with the editor in chief at JAMA, of all places, which is a medical clinical journal. But
Right. Right.
we explained, this could actually have implications for human patients. And so they took a gamble and we submitted it in many, many rounds of reviews and dozens of revisions. But we
Right.
got it to the point where it met the level for JAMA and we published. And
What year was that? What
that was in 2015.
2000?
2015. And
Wow.
really, that's how Peel kicked off because
Okay.
at that point, Anthony, that's when I got invited to go to Israel and give a talk about this paper that was coming out in JAMA and about the elephants.
Ah, I see. So interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
keep going. Uh-huh.
So, so now again, Anthony, here at this point, though, I'm still thinking academics, right? I'm still
Right.
thinking academics. And I was giving a talk in Israel, my first time visiting there in Haifa. And there's a lot of technology in Israel, biotechnology, Technion in Haifa. And in the audience was my future co-founder. I had never met him before. His name is Dr. Avi Schroeder. Brilliant, brilliant chemical engineer.
Hmm.
And what Dr. Schroeder does is he works with nanotechnology, nanoparticles. So he makes new medicines. He's able to actually put payloads into these little nanoparticles to deliver as new medicines. But I had never met him. So I'm giving my talk about the elephants, and I end as I usually did. And I said, oh, it's too bad there's no way to take this P53 that has developed over millions and millions of years of an elephant to
Right.
create the perfect cancer fighting protein. If only there was a way to deliver it somehow to our patients. But oh well, it's just science fiction. Not knowing Dr. Schroeder was in the audience, and that's exactly what he does. And in fact, Anthony, Avi wrote down on a piece of paper, I've told him since, save that paper. He said, I need to meet Dr. Schiffman to
Hmm.
learn more about the elephant cancer fighting protein
So
to put
interesting.
this into our nanotechnology.
Hmm.
And then he spoke, and I had never met him before. And he was talking about nanoparticles and they could put anything in and deliver it. And I said, oh my God. And I wrote on my piece of paper, need to meet Dr. Schroeder to learn about his nanotechnology to put our elephant cancer fighting protein inside.
Unbelievable.
And Anthony, I got to tell you, we started talking during the break and we just hit it off. It was like an instant connection. And
Wow.
we said, we need to figure out a way to work together with our medicine and science background in Utah and your technology background in Israel and Technion and come together and make a medicine for people. And we realized, Anthony, what I think you've realized and many of the listeners have realized is that academics is wonderful for discovery. But if you want to make a new medicine and you want to get to the patients and you want to get there fast, you need to commercialize, right? You need to go into biotech because this was an endeavor, right? We're talking about making a brand new medicine. This was going to cost tens, 20s, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And we wanted to go quickly. And I'll tell you, our patients are still dying every day. We don't have 20, 30 years that it takes in academics. So
Right.
we said right there and then, standing in Haifa, meeting for the first time, we said, we're going to make a company. We're going to create a biotech. We're going to create a startup, and we're going to make them new medicines. And they're going to be evolution inspired like the elephants. And we're going to take them to the patients as quickly as possible.
And had Avi been involved in any startups prior to this one?
Yeah, actually, Avi trained at MIT as part of his postdoctoral work, and he trained with Bob Langer. And
Oh,
so
okay.
he
Very
was
famous guy.
yeah, the famous Bob Langer. So he
Right.
was very familiar with this idea of making companies from your discoveries to help people. And in fact, Avi had started several companies of his own. And we started talking, and I said to Avi, well, Avi, we got to think of a name for this company. I said, what's the Hebrew word for elephant? And he said, oh, Josh, the Hebrew word for elephant is PEEL, P-E-E-L. I said,
Uh,
what do you think about the name PEEL Therapeutics? He said, I love it. I said, so do I. Boom, PEEL was born. So that's where elephant therapeutics, that's where we come from.
so you pivoted then from like a five-star academic career into starting a brand new biotechnology company. What year was that?
That was 2015 when we started talking, and we incorporated in 2016.
Wow. So you're now, I guess, 5 years into it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so then, okay, so what happened after that?
Well, so then it obviously became clear that PEEL Therapeutics would need a lot of attention and a lot of tender loving care to grow. And we had to find investors and a board of directors. And so we really began our journey. And it's been unbelievable. Now I've had to back away, like you said, from academics.
Right.
I
Yes.
still, I still have a lab. You know, I've dropped down to part-time so I can really focus on PEEL and growing the company and making it successful. We have almost 15 full-time employees. We have many different consultants. We have expanded to several drugs in the pipeline. One of the things, Anthony, that's been very important is because I am a first-time CEO, I certainly surround myself with those who have been successful in the field before. So we've stacked the deck with our advisors, certainly people who've been there, done that, individuals. And also, I'm really proud on our board of directors. We were fortunate to get an individual, Dr. Will Deere, who used to be SVP and an international chief medical officer at Amgen, who is now living in Utah. So he's been a fantastic mentor and obviously has quite a bit of experience. And before Amgen, he worked at Eli Lilly. We also have been very fortunate to have, and talk about disruptors, we have Dr. John Warnock. And Dr. Warnock actually invented the PDF and started Adobe. He was one of the co-founders of Adobe. So he knows a thing or two about disruptive technology. And then we also have a very successful businesswoman, Mary Tolan out of Chicago, and she runs a fund, an equity fund, Chicago Pacific Founders. And so we have medicine, we have technology, we have business guiding us on the board, which has really allowed us to grow our company successfully and really get drugs in the pipeline on their way to the people who need them.
So tell us what you've got. Tell us about your various programs. I know there was one in particular that really captured my interest, but take us through your program.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just very briefly go through and tell you one of the things that we've learned while we've been making elephant nanoparticles, and you can imagine it's a painstaking process full of love, but does take a while. So while we've been building and learning about these nanoparticles with delivering elephant P53 at PEEL, we've really taken the focus on let's look to nature, let's look to evolution and see how is evolution used biology to solve health problems over, again, tens of millions, some cases hundreds of millions of years. And let's really use this technology, in some cases Israeli technology, and be at the intersection of nature and technology. So one of the drugs that we've licensed and worked with is actually a fascinating peptide. It's called a neutrophil targeting peptide. And it turns out,
I think that's the one I was particularly fascinated by.
yeah, so it turns out, Anthony, that when we went to med school, we learned that the immune system, well, it's pretty good, but maybe some parts of it are not that glamorous, like the neutrophils, right? You and I were taught neutrophils were like Pac-Man and they gobbled up bacteria, and it's good to have that, and that's fine. And that's they were first responders and they're on the scene and they help take care of things immediately. Well, it turns out that in the past, 5 to 10 years, we've learned that, not surprisingly, neutrophils are a bit more sophisticated. And instead of being like Pac-Man, they're more like Spider-Man shooting out webs. And those webs, believe it or not, are their own DNA inside. And so when a neutrophil encounters any type of pathogen, in order to try to trap that pathogen, it literally spits out its insides. It spits out these webs of sticky DNA called neutrophil extracellular trap. The videos are mind-boggling to watch. You just see the neutrophil and then boom, out comes these DNA nets and they capture anything that's there. Now, a little bit of nets, Anthony, that's pretty good because it catches what shouldn't be floating around the blood.
Right.
But too many nets actually leads to an inflammatory cascade and something called immunothrombosis or microclots. Because what happens is these nets come out, and then not only do the bacteria get caught in them, other neutrophils get caught in them, more nets come out, and then platelets come out, and then nets and Van Willebrand's factor. And pretty soon you've got all of these micro mini clots, microthrombi in the vasculature. And it turns out that these nets, this net inflammatory process is due to almost any type of human inflammation, all the way from rheumatoid arthritis to lupus to Crohn's disease to strokes to heart attacks, both chronic and acute, even asthma. The neutrophils go to the lungs, and when they're activated, they shoot out their nets, leading to inflammation. So what does this have to do with PEEL?
Right.
Well, there was. See, it's very good to interview me. I'll ask my own questions. You just can sit back and there. There you
You're doing great.
go.
Mhm.
Thanks. So, a colleague here at the University of Utah discovered that newborn babies, right, little babies, in the first few days of life, they secrete a natural peptide that targets neutrophils that blocks nets. It's a natural net inhibitor. And
Interesting.
if you, yeah, and it's only there for the first few days of life, Anthony. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? Because a newborn baby comes from a relatively sterile environment inside their mother. They're born, and then suddenly in this world rich of pathogens and microbiomes and hundreds of millions, if not billions, of bacteria. And so, what this peptide is, the way I describe it, it's like Mother Nature's dimmer switch. It just, for the first few days of life, calms down the inflammation. It prevents those neutrophils from shooting out these nets, prevents the baby from going into multi-organ failure,
Right.
clotting off its major organs and going into sepsis. And then after a few days, the peptide goes away and everything goes on pretty well. Although, as you know, we get inflammation as we go through life. And so what Peel has done is sub-license this technology and the patent for this to actually create a medicine that blocks nets. It's a net inhibitor. And what's so important about this net inhibitor that Peel is working on, this neonatal net inhibitory factor, is that it's natural, right? Evolution has worked. It wasn't created in the lab. It was created in hundreds of millions of years of life on the planet of
Right.
how do you block inflammation. And what we've seen, Anthony, is when we give this peptide to mice with sepsis, we take, and sepsis is multi-organ failure, the organs are clotting off from all of these nets that are blocking the flow. We have seen that these mice, their survival goes from zero, like the patients you and I have taken care of in the past in the ICUs, no survivors. We give them just 2 doses of this little peptide right at the start of sepsis. We block their nets from firing, the neutrophils from firing nets, and their survival goes from 0% to over 70%.
Wow.
0 to over 70, again and again and again. And so we're really excited now to move this drug forward. We're thinking about chronic indications as well, autoimmune disease. Yeah, go ahead.
Is this a small molecule or is it
It's
an
a
antibody targeted against that
it's a it's
protein?
a peptide. It's a peptide.
It's a
And
peptide.
so yeah. And so what we're doing now in-house with our research and development teams in Peel is we're looking to see, okay, so what is the best way to deliver this, doing all the PK, PD studies, ADME, to try to really understand, what is the full breadth of this potential of this peptide.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Sounds really fascinating. So, where are you in the development of this?
So this one, again, we are working now on doing some initial toxicity studies. We're looking at different indications. One point that I didn't mention is that COVID-19 actually is become really relevant to our company in that many of the patients who have died from COVID-19 die from microclots, microthrombi,
Right.
and sepsis and respiratory failure. And in
Mm.
fact, Peel was able to work with colleagues this summer to publish in Blood one of the first descriptions of these nets in patients who
Oh,
have severe COVID-19. And we were able to show if you take the plasma from patients with COVID-19, it has factors in it that make neutrophils shoot out like 50 times as many nets as normal. They're neutrophils. It's like neutrophils on crack, Anthony, is the only way to describe it.
right.
And in a dish, we can actually block that response completely with our peptides. So we're also doing COVID-19 testing to see if there's a possibility there that it could be useful.
Fantastic. Wow. Really, really interesting. I mean, being in the infectious disease space myself, when I first saw your presentation on these nets, I was really marveling at the concept. So it's great that you're able to somehow translate that into the clinic.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's particularly exciting because this really is a first-in-class drug, right? There's no net inhibitors that work in this specific way. And again, this is something we didn't invent it, evolution invented it, right? And what we are able to do is take our technology and take our knowledge of drug discovery and drug development and turn this into a medicine.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And then I'll just say quickly that we also have Peel. We have one other drug in our pipeline that's actually our lead candidate. So we're sort of
Mhm.
this one is actually also based on evolution. This is based on a plant toxin. It comes from a camptothecin molecule, something that is known from ancient Chinese Eastern traditional medicine, something called the happy tree. Which is different than the happy tree in California. That's the marijuana bush. That's something different. This is actually a medicinal plant that is from, like I said, ancient China, and it's a topo 1 isomerase inhibitor. It actually blocks DNA repair, and there have been other drugs made from topo 1 inhibitors, but this drug is particularly potent the way that we've modified it and linked it with pegylation, so it's a pegylated carrier,
Mhm.
working again with academic colleagues, and we've been able to see, and this is the part as an oncologist for me that's completely mind blowing, is we've been able to see cures in mice that are 6 months or more. And I don't like using the word cure. As an oncologist, it makes me very nervous. That's the C word, right? Some people say the C word is cancer. For me, the C word is cure.
Right.
I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver to patients, but at least in the mice, right? The data is what the data is. We've tested this in pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer, neuroblastoma. Our colleagues have tested in Ewing sarcoma. And we just see this over and over again, no matter whose hands it is. This drug, it's just remarkable. It is able to avoid chemo resistance. It's designed in such a way that the tumors don't spit it out. One clinician described it to me. It's sort of like the Roach Motel, right? The chemo checks in but doesn't check out. So it goes into the cancer cells and it completely wipes it away. And in fact, we are now getting ready to prepare for initial discussions with the FDA. And if things go well, knock on wood, Anthony, we should hopefully have a clinical trial, our first in human clinical trial with this plant toxin within a year. We'll see. We'll see how it goes, but we're very excited. So we started with the elephants, right? It certainly we tried to be disruptive with the elephants, and we're still working on the elephants, and it's fantastic. Now we've got peptides that are blocking a whole new mechanism of inflammation. We have plant toxins that have evolved, right, to help plants, but now we think they can help some of the most sickest, desperate cancer patients. And it's really, I started in academics, but boy, biotech has been the most exciting and rewarding part of my career so far. I really feel, Anthony, that we are disrupting the world out there, and we're going to help so many patients along the way.
Wow. Well, this has been a really, really interesting talking to you and finding out more about what you're doing, how you got there, your pathway, and we'll look forward. How do people get hold of you if they want to hear more about Peel?
Yeah, you can just go to the website, peeltx.com, peeltx.com, or you can email me directly, Schiffman, JSCHIFFMAN at peeltx.com. We actually have a fundraising round going on now. In fact, it's really, we've been oversubscribed. The early investor interest has been incredible, and people have really responded to this idea of evolution holding the key to new disruptive medicines. And so we're delighted to talk to anyone who wants to be a part of PEEL Therapeutics as we move forward.
So tell me about the award. I heard you got some kind of award recently, Joshua.
Yeah, so PEEL Therapeutics, we were really lucky. Or I should say, maybe we earned it. Who knows? But we are part of the biotech community here in Utah, and really, Bio Utah is how they've labeled it, and they're really making a big push to build up the biotech community around Salt Lake City, around Park City. They've done that in the tech space, so people call this area Silicon Slopes as opposed to Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And so they're trying to do the same thing now with biotech. And so there's an annual biotech conference that occurs here every year for all of the biotech that's now relocated or growing here in Utah. And there was actually a pitch competition that we were selected to participate in. There were quite a few companies that applied, and then from those, a handful were chosen to actually prepare a 10-minute pitch presentation, which we were able to do. And we were selected as the first prize winners. We won something called the Schwegman Prize, which is great. It was over $15,000 of awards and help and connections. It has really been a phenomenal boost to our company. And really, for me, what it served as the most as the CEO of this startup that's growing, it was external validation, right? They had judges from all over that were evaluating us, and so it was nice to see that other people are as excited by PEEL Therapeutics and what we're doing as we are ourselves.
Wow. Congratulations. When was this award? It was not too long ago,
Yeah,
right?
it was just in February. Just in February.
Wow.
So we're really really excited
Is
by
this
that.
the first time they've done this award, or how long has this award been around?
They've been doing this, I believe, for a couple of years now.
Fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
congrats to that for
yeah.
sure.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been so great to chat with you and hear about your pathway from the East Coast to the West Coast to Utah. And it sounds like you're a real trailblazer. So congratulations, and we look forward to hearing more positive things in the future. Let me know for sure when you get to your IND.
Absolutely. And thank you, Anthony, for having me on your show today. This has really been fantastic.
You're welcome.